Kim Potter, the Minnesota police officer found guilty of manslaughter in the killing of Daunte Wright, was sentenced to 24 months on Friday, 16 of those months behind bars. This is lower than the state's recommended guidelines. In Minnesota, someone convicted of first-degree manslaughter with no criminal history would typically receive a sentence that ranges from just more than 6 to about 8.5 years behind bars. Now, as a reminder, everyone agrees that she had intended to reach for her taser and reached for her gun instead. Now, because it is the single biggest piece of evidence in the trial, here again is that shooting and her reaction. I've said it many times. In addition to, of course, feeling for the family of Daunte Wright, I felt sympathy for Kim Potter. It is clear that she did not do this on purpose. But as a legal matter, I also believe that her actions fit the definition of first-degree manslaughter. Judge Regina Chu shared my general sentiment.
Here, everybody agrees, and the evidence is undisputed, that Officer Potter never intended to use her firearm. She mistakenly drew her firearm at all times, intending to use her taser. Unlike other manslaughter 1 cases, Officer Potter's actions were not driven by personal animosity toward Daunte Wright. Instead, she was acting in the line of duty in effectuating a lawful arrest.
And there is no doubt that she was remorseful. Potter herself spoke on Friday saying how sorry she was.
To the family of Daunte Wright, I am so sorry that I brought the death of your son, father, brother, uncle, grandson, nephew, and the rest of your family to your home. Katie, I understand a mother's love, and I am sorry I broke your heart. My heart is broken for all of you.
Back in January, prosecutors asked Potter's sentence exceed the state's maximum of 15 years because they said she abused her authority as a police officer and endangered others when she fired her weapon. Now, this show raised concerns, showing examples of manslaughter convictions where people fatally shot victims on purpose and were given around 8 years in Minnesota. Prosecutors reversed course last week and asked for Potter to receive approximately a 7-year sentence, something I praised them for. The Office of the Attorney General released a statement following Friday's sentencing, saying in part, quote, "I accept her judgment. I urge everyone to accept her judgment. I don't ask you to agree with her decision, which takes nothing away from the truth of the jury's verdict. I know it's hurtful to loved ones of Daunte Wright. I ask that we remember the beauty of Daunte Wright." I asked my team this morning to search for some specific examples so we could try to find cases similar to this one, like Robert Bates, a reserve Tulsa County, Oklahoma deputy in 2015. He did the exact same thing as Potter, said taser, taser, taser before the shooting, and killing a man with a revolver. He got the state's maximum for manslaughter, 4 years, and served about 1.5 years of it behind bars. But it's not just police officers, right? In 2019, upstate New York native Thomas Jadlowski was sentenced to spend 1 to 3 years behind bars for accidentally shooting someone while hunting. He admitted to the 2017 shooting of a woman walking her dogs, but said he thought she was a deer. Investigators determined the shots were fired well after sunset, the legal close of daily hunting. Bottom line, he was criminally reckless. Also in 2019, a former Marine was sentenced to at least 1 year prison for accidentally killing a fellow service member. Tyler Pruden spent over 13 months behind bars for killing fellow service member and friend Lenija Gilpatrick. Pruden claimed he pointed what he believed was an unloaded gun at Gilpatrick's face and fired, shooting his friend in the eye. Now look, I can understand how family members of victims, including Daunte Wright, of course, would be angry at anything other than the maximum. But we leave those decisions to judges for a reason. And I'll admit, I was surprised at the sentence for Kim Potter, but it still certainly seems like a reasonable sentence to me. Joining me now is Ayesha Bell Hardaway, an attorney and associate professor at Case Western University's School of Law. Thanks so much for coming on the program. I appreciate it. So let me ask you, do you think that this is an improper sentence?
I don't know necessarily that I would say it's an improper sentence. I would say that what the judge offered as her explanation for the sentence really doesn't quite pass the smell test for me, if you will, and that then in light of the sheer emotion she had on the bench really caused to question whether or not this was an impartial, fairly adjudicated sort of sentence that she decided to deliver in this particular case.
Well, when you say impartial, what do you mean by that? Meaning she's watched the entirety of the trial, right? She's come to her own conclusions about what she thinks about the facts and the evidence and the possible sentence. I would think at that point she doesn't have to, quote unquote, be impartial. I mean, unless you're suggesting that she was doing it for a reason related to something other than the facts and evidence in the case.
Yeah, no, I hear you really clear on that, Dan. But what I would say is that, out of all of my years of prosecuting cases and defending cases in criminal court, I've never seen a judge express such empathy for a convicted felon. The way that Judge Chen decided to handle Kim Potter and implore others to express a level of empathy for her, right, is something that struck me as very, very different. And then also as related to my time in the courtroom, the tears that she shed for Kim Potter. It was very clear that she was shedding those tears for Kim Potter and not for the loss of Daunte Wright's life. That struck me as very, very odd and certainly not coming from a place of impartiality, just based on the evidence that she heard.
I put myself in her position and I think to myself, okay, I watched a good amount of the trial and I felt enormous sympathy for Kim Potter. That doesn't detract from the fact that I also felt sympathy, of course, for the family of Daunte Wright, the way I do in any case where there's a victim. But does that, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, does that make me impartial? Does it mean that if I were the judge and I felt the same way she did, which, and I'm not saying crying and this and that, but I wonder, is that wrong? I guess is the question I'm asking.
Yeah. And I would say to you that if you're the judge, yes, it is, right? This is a case that was brought by the state of Minnesota surrounding the details of the taking of a young man's life. And because of the evidence that was brought and that was shown, yes, the defense had an obligation to put on their case, right? The judge is sitting there. The jury came back with the decision. So let's get back to this, right? The jury came back with the decision of guilty on both first-degree and second-degree manslaughter. But this significant downward departure that the judge decided to use here completely, in many ways, I would say, nullifies, right, the jury's verdict here. If there was this feeling that because she was so remorseful and that this was clearly an accident, if that feeling was based in legal sort of grounding, the judge could have absolutely not allowed those counts to go to the jury. But they did go to the jury. And we know that in Minnesota, right, the 6 to 8.5 years is the amount of time that's typically handed down for these types of crimes. And her recitation of the purposes of deterrence was extremely limiting, right? Whether or not it only affects or impacts would deter Kim Potter is not, right, is not the sole reason why we have the deterrence factor in criminal sentencing. And then again, right, this very focused, imploring the public to be sympathetic to Kim Potter. And the only time she mentioned Daunte Wright, the judge, she said, of course, Daunte Wright's life mattered. Right? As I'm sitting here go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to play a little bit of the judge because you're mentioning the judge, and this is number 4 that we have. This is part of the judge's comments when she issued her sentence.
She drew her taser legitimately to protect a fellow officer on the other side of the vehicle who could have been dragged and seriously injured if the car were to speed away. Officer Potter's conduct clearly was not significantly more serious than that typically involved in the commission of the crime in question, justifying an upward departure.
Now, I'm guessing that you're going to disagree with some of that, but I'll tell you my thoughts listening to that is, first of all, I don't think of it as nullifying the verdict to decide to give a downward departure. And secondly, I largely agree with the comments she made. You get the final word here.
Yeah, I would just say, looking at the body cam, right, and using the defense's justification for why she pulled the taser, really sort of ignores the fact that no harm was, she actually shot Daunte Wright. He did still speed off. He wasn't stopped from driving, and none of the officers were harmed by him. And thankfully, they weren't harmed by her bullets. But there was a passenger in that car, and there was, in fact, an officer on the other side of that car. And by the grace of God, none of them were harmed. But that doesn't negate the danger that Kim Potter put everyone in by deciding to draw her taser, and instead her weapon, her firearm.
All right, well, I said I'd give you the final word, so I'm going to be quiet. Professor Bell Hardaway, thank you so much for coming on the show. I hope you come back. Thank you for watching. Click the red subscribe button below so you can get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.